Ancient Egypt, land of the pyramids. Welcome and thanks for joining us. Today, we're going to have a close-up look at the many landmarks of ancient Egypt that are dotted along the Nile River, from Lower Egypt in the north to Upper Egypt in the south. Let's start here in Giza, just outside of modern-day Cairo, where these enduring structures continue to fascinate and overwhelm us even today, thousands of years after being built. These three giant pyramids are Egypt's top tourist attraction and are also thought to be one of the greatest feats of engineering the world has ever known. As if that wasn't enough, they are also some of the oldest and largest stone structures in the world. They were built as very elaborate tombs for three pharaohs: Khufu, his son Khafra, and a third pharaoh, Menkaure. The sides of these pyramids are almost exactly aligned with the cardinal points of the compass: north, south, east, and west. At 455 feet high, Khufu's pyramid, known as the Great Pyramid, is one of the tallest stone buildings on Earth. It is also one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world. In fact, it's the only one of the 7 ancient wonders that is still around today, even though it's the oldest of them all, at more than 4,500 years old. Each side of its base is 755 feet long. To give you an idea of what that means, you can fit 10 football fields inside the perimeter of the base. The Great Pyramid is made up of more than 2.3 million limestone blocks, each weighing around 2.5 tons. Each block was cut by hand, hauled up mud and brick ramps on wooden rollers, and dragged into place by many, many workmen. At a rate of 300 blocks per day, it has been calculated that it may have taken 25,000 men a period of 20 years to build it. Inside the pyramid are a series of chambers, or large rooms, leading to the actual burial chamber. Along the internal hallways are hieroglyphic inscriptions of magic spells and paintings to aid the journey to the afterlife. In the burial chambers is everything the pharaoh would need in the afterlife. Food, clothing, board games, even furniture have been found, buried along with the dead. In total, the ruins of more than 35 major pyramids can be found along the banks of the Nile. We are still fascinated with the shape of the pyramid and continue to use it even today. Close by the Great Pyramid is one of the most captivating symbols of ancient Egypt, the Great Sphinx. It has been sitting watching over the pyramids at Giza for 4,500 years, ever since it was built around 2500 BCE. It is around 250 feet long and stands more than 6 stories high. The head and face of the Sphinx are believed to be the face of one of the pharaohs buried here at Giza. It has the body of a lion, which is thought to emphasize the king's role as a son of Ra and a strong ruler. Can you believe for thousands of years it was buried up to its neck under sand? Some time after the building of the pyramids, around 1700 BCE, the capital of ancient Egypt was moved south to the city of Thebes. Once there, Thebes became an important center for religion and government and became one of the largest urban areas in all of Egypt. Here, we can find many of the most elaborate and enduring buildings. As a bit of a background, by the time the pharaohs moved to Thebes, they were no longer building elaborate pyramids. Instead, they began to bury their kings in these secret underground tombs in order to stop the graves from being broken into and robbed. They created this area called the Valley of the Kings, which is known as a necropolis or a city of the dead. Sometimes they even carved the burial chambers right out of the cliff walls to make it easier to protect against the grave robbers. As with the pyramids, these tombs were also packed with glittering treasure and contained everything the royals would need in their next life. So far, at today's count, nearly 100 tombs have been discovered here. By the time they were discovered by Egyptologists in the early 1900s, almost all the tombs had been broken into and their valuable goods stolen. One of the few that had not been plundered was the tomb of the famous young pharaoh Tutankhamun. His tomb was one of the last to be discovered back in 1922, and when it was, wow! What an amazing treasure trove there was to behold. No other single find provided as much information as this well-preserved tomb of the teenage pharaoh. Inside, they found many glorious items for King Tut's use in his afterlife. Close by is the Valley of the Queens, a similar necropolis where the tombs of Egyptian queens can be found. Between these two valleys is a village that is known as Deir el-Medina. Deir el-Medina is an ancient Egyptian village where the tomb workers and their families lived. This town existed for 400 years and saw many generations of craftsmen, engineers, scribes, and laborers. It provides one of the most detailed accounts of community life in the ancient world and is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This western side of the Nile is not only where royalty have been buried, but it's also where temples have been created to honor them. This temple was built to honor the female pharaoh Hatshepsut. Remember her? Her temple is considered one of ancient Egypt's greatest artistic achievements. As you can see, it's been carved right out of the side of the cliffs. And there are 3 wide terraces that are connected by ramps. The front of each terrace is made up of a series of colonnades of squared pillars. Nearby is another temple, this one to honor Ramses II, appropriately called the Ramesseum. Although it is no longer in very good condition, you can still see a few columns around the temple site, and also some inscribed battle scenes that tell of his many successes. Not far away, at Medinet Habu, is another series of buildings. These were built in honor of his son Ramses III. Its strong fortifications tell us that the Medinet Habu was used as a safe haven in times of unrest. It, too, is decorated with battle scenes. Leaving the necropolis and crossing over to the eastern bank of the Nile, we come to the land of the living. This is where the people of Thebes lived, and where the modern city of Luxor can be found. It is also the place to see Egypt's 2 largest temple complexes, those at Karnak and Luxor. The temples on the western side, in the necropolis areas, are mortuary temples honoring the deceased. But here on the eastern side, the temples are dedicated to the gods. As we also know from other civilizations, the ancient people spent a great deal of time trying to stay on the good side of their gods. This devotion was very important because gods were believed to have power over every aspect of life. One of the ways they showed their dedication is by building elaborate temples to honor them. These temples usually have some features in common with each other. This entrance is usually made up of a pair of towering walls called a pylon, leading to a courtyard and then a series of halls with columns. Beyond the outer halls are smaller chambers known as sanctuaries. In one of these small chambers, the statue of a god is kept. Only priests, and possibly the pharaoh, could enter these sanctuaries. The Temple of Karnak is Egypt's largest and most important temple complex. Okay, are you ready for this? Not only is it the biggest temple complex in Egypt, it's the biggest religious center in the world. Karnak started out as a modest shrine, but over the course of 2,000 years, many pharaohs added on to it, eventually creating this huge temple complex. The ancient Egyptians had a name for it that translates to the most perfect of places. This is the most famous part of the temple, the hypostyle hall, a common feature in many temples. Here we can count 134 of these gigantic pillars. Years ago, a roof would have rested on them. This explains the name hypostyle, which is Greek for bearing pillars. It is thought to be one of the greatest works of architecture from ancient Egypt. The huge complex also includes workshops, living quarters, a school, a library, and a sacred pool. The sacred pool is where the priests would go to cleanse themselves before performing rituals. Very close by is another large temple complex, this one at Luxor. It is connected to Karnak along an avenue more than a mile long and majestically lined with sphinxes. Approaching the temple, the first sight to overwhelm us is the pylon, or walled gateway at the entrance. Just like many other pylons, this one has two taller sections with inclined walls and a middle section for the actual entrance to the temple area. In front of the pylon at Luxor is a tall, dramatic obelisk. Obelisks are tall, tapered towers used as a dramatic entranceway to a temple. They most often come in pairs, and this one too used to have a twin, one that was gifted to France and now resides in Paris. This entrance was constructed under the direction of Ramses II, which is why there are two giant statues of him as you approach the entranceway. Walking through the hallways is a delight to the senses, with hieroglyphics everywhere the eye can see. The Luxor temple is especially dramatic at night. Traveling further south along the Nile, we come to Edfu, where we can find the Temple of Horus, the falcon god. It was about 200 years in the making and is more than 2,000 years old. Its most remarkable feature is this largest pylon of existing temples in Egypt. Inside the entrance is the Court of Offerings, where people would come to give gifts to the image of Horus. At the back of this courtyard is a large statue of the god Horus in his falcon form that stands about 10 feet high. Few buildings from the ancient world are as well preserved as this temple. The holiest part of the temple is a room known as the Sanctuary of Horus. It contains a shrine, an offering table, and the ceremonial boat that the statue of Horus was carried on during festivals. Continuing to make our way south along the Nile, we next arrive at another notable site in Egypt. We are at Philae, visiting the temple dedicated to the supreme goddess Isis, a giver of life, healer, and protector of kings. She and this temple were even popular with the Roman Empire, even after they had taken over Egypt. Ancient pilgrims came from all over the Roman Empire to worship Isis here at Philae. At the southern limits of Egypt is the impressive temple of Abu Simbel. Like many other priceless Egyptian landmarks, it too was buried under the sands of time until being rediscovered in the early 1800s. It took 4 years to completely uncover the facade, colossal statues, and entrance. It was built to honor, you guessed it, Ramses II. He wanted his faraway subjects here in the south to be reminded of their pharaoh's greatness all day, every day. Greeting you at the entrance to the Great Temple is not one statue of Ramses, but 4, each of them 65 feet high. The interior is filled with reliefs and paintings, glorifying his skill in battle and hunting. In ancient times, the walls and pillars of these and all temples would have been brightly painted and decorated with gold, silver, and precious stones. Ramses II had much to be proud of as a ruler of this great civilization. His accomplishments were many, as are the achievements of the ancient Egyptian civilization as a whole. Overall, they conquered large areas of land to create a kingdom that has stretched for over 1,000 miles from the Mediterranean Sea to modern-day Sudan. They developed a centralized government to rule over these vast areas. They built cities such as Thebes and Luxor. They created their own accurate calendar, which helped them predict the flooding of the Nile and successfully manage the farming season. They had a complex spiritual life with many gods, and they crafted rituals as a way to interact with them. They constructed buildings that are some of the most amazing and impressive structures ever created, even by today's standards. The Egyptians had advanced systems of numbering and measuring, which they demonstrated in their engineering expertise. They created paper in the form of papyrus. They also created an elaborate communication system with their hieroglyphics. Because they had such effective communication tools, we are now able to fully appreciate the achievements they have left behind. The biggest modern-day challenge with regard to the ancient Egyptians is how best to preserve these gifts of history. The passage of time and the climate make this an ongoing challenge. So does the impact of the many well-meaning tourists that flock here to get a glimpse of history firsthand. With luck and care, the legacy of this magnificent civilization will be around for many centuries to come, so that future generations can be as impressed as we are with this ancient world. We hope you enjoyed our trip back in time to ancient Egypt, and that you have a new understanding about life way back in the land of the pyramids. We hope to see you on another trip soon. See you next time.